Welcome to Experiential Realism. I'm Arlindo, the philosophical artist. Today's topic is dark and contentious, but it's important in a world where a godless religion, devoid of spirit, of consciousness, and treating morality as a mere construct, is prevalent. In the age of materialism, I hear the usual memes about the idea of the finality of death making life more pressing and meaningful, as if the supposed knowledge that we cease to exist completely makes living meaningfully more imperative. Well, besides giving us a kind of urgency about not wasting time and idly watching life pass us by, I don't think it's necessarily true that materialists, atheists, and existential nihilists necessarily lead more meaningful and productive lives. In fact, a materialist can easily become the victim of the materialist pitfall that makes life seem pointless. It is also true that most people don't think of death, certainly not all the time, and it's usually a subject that's avoided. Materialists often say that a belief in an afterlife devalues this life because people might lose the motivation to do anything in the now if they think they will get a chance in the beyond. But I don't think that's necessarily true either. In fact, the evidence from NDEers, people who have near-death experiences, shows quite the opposite. Apart from the NDE often dispelling the fear of death, NDEs tend to make people believe in an afterlife, and this seems to have a positive effect on them. They tend to become more considerate and compassionate of others, and there is also a newfound zest for life and a courage to grab it by the horns, as it were, in the knowledge that everything will be okay in the end. We don't necessarily stop living for today just because tomorrow is promised. Life is more nuanced than we usually take it to be on the surface. Hence the maxim popularized by Benjamin Franklin, "Don't leave for tomorrow what you can do today." It's a phrase to remind us that procrastination can lead to missing opportunities or being overwhelmed by other tasks in the future. Likewise, it is possible to imagine an afterlife of regret about missed opportunities or unfinished business in life. And it is also possible to imagine non-believers thinking that it doesn't matter if things remain uncompleted, because to them it won't matter to anyone in the oblivion of death. Nothing matters anyway, so why bother? What this shows is that attitudes towards the same belief vary. But the main point is this: we shouldn't believe or disbelieve in something based on the psychological impact it might have on us. We should only believe in something because it is true or likely to be. As an idealist, I happen to find the afterlife hypothesis more compelling than the idea of total annihilation at death. It is primarily based on observations about consciousness which lead me to believe it is indestructible, as much as energy cannot be created nor destroyed. This view has nothing to do with an emotional attachment. If that were true, if that were the case, I wouldn't have subscribed to physicalism for so long before my metanoia towards idealist metaphysics. I had accepted physicalism and nihilism up until about 4 years ago, when I saw what was happening in the scientific community regarding quantum physics and neuroscience, particularly regarding consciousness. And then it made me review my own experiences from previous decades, which I had dismissed as mere coincidences and hallucinations. So I've always been on a quest for truth, and for a long time I've lived by this motto. I'd rather have a cold, harsh truth than a consoling lie. However, my research and reasoning has led me to conclude that consciousness is irreducible and fundamental, and therefore we are the eternal witness, whether we like it or not. My paradigm began to shift in 2022 when a trio of scientists, John Clauser, Anton Zeilinger, and Alan Aspect, tested Bell's theorem and proved that local realism is false, for which they won the Nobel Prize. All of these scientists abandoned materialism in favor of metaphysical idealism. One of them even wrote a paper about it, Anton Zeilinger. The following year, Christoph Koch lost a 25-year-old bet to David Chalmers, the man who coined the term hard problem of consciousness, because his detective neural correlates to test Tononi's integrated information theory failed to explain consciousness as a byproduct. That same year, I witnessed renowned experts with opposing views about consciousness, and all of them seemed to be scratching their heads about the phenomenon. Eventually, I began to pay attention to what Hoffman was saying about results coming out of the Large Hadron Collider, showing that reality isn't quite what we think it is. Besides Clauser and co. showing that there are no hidden variables to explain quantum entanglement, physicists at CERN noticed that it took endless pages of algebraic equations just to describe a single particle trajectory, which was really counterintuitive until it was suggested that perhaps we should regard space-time as just another feature of reality rather than a fundamental fabric. When they did so, the mathematics became simpler, taking just a page to describe a single trajectory, and new geometries were discovered which have to exist beyond the Planck scale and symmetrically map onto features of our unified quantum field, such as mass, spin, momentum, etc. So, what should be the fundamental, if not space-time? This is when consciousness was suggested, reviving the old conclusion arrived at by the Wigner-Neumann collaboration, which they shied away from because they feared what their peers would think. One of the geometric shapes that contain decorated permutations giving rise to the Markovian dynamics of our space-time construct is the amplituhedron, which contains trillions of dimensions and of which our universe is only a negligible derivative. And the other one that is now talked about in surfaceology is the associahedron, whose properties follow the associativity rule. Arkani Hamed et al. Showed that this polytope plays a central role in the theory of scattering amplitudes and describes the space of kinematics pertinent to position, velocity, and acceleration. This geometric shape also helps us to explain amplitudinal relations in string theory. Hoffman et al. Describe our reality as akin to a cheap headset VR, which is removed at death, and the conscious agent then possibly becomes aware of the wider reality and the oneness of consciousness. In Hoffman's view, only conscious agents exist, and the worlds which are perceived are merely illusions forming part of Cantor's infinities. there are most likely other headsets which are better and unimaginable to us human beings. Our world is a cheap projection of a more wholesome one, but he is also humble enough to state that we will probably never have a theory of everything as human beings with our limited perspective. In essence, our world is made of incomplete information from a complete source, which seems to match what we observe about our entropic world, where life forms struggle to self-preserve and compete for resources, as is the case in Darwinian evolution. But in the realm of the source, there is no need for competition, as there is no scarcity of resources. The wellspring of reality brings to mind Plato's more wholesome realm, of which this world is less real and a mere shadow. This concept, or theory, appears to match the collapse of the wave function in quantum physics, where the fuzzy roots of reality appear to be pregnant with infinite potential, and our classical world being a collapsed outcome of myriad superpositions. What is a physical reality if not something akin to a collective dream? What is physical if not a concept for how the reality we share feels to us? After all we have is mental experiences. What is matter or material? What is meant by material? Scale down to the subatomic level and we find that wood and metal are of the same energy. Atoms are mostly empty space, so we look at the nuclei for anything concrete about reality. But then we find that even the nuclei are made of bundles of energy, which are invisible forces pushing and pulling. Even physicists acknowledge that it's like a Cheshire cat grinning. Dennett once said that in order to have an explanation for consciousness, we must start with unconscious elements in order to comprehend its presupposed birth. The trouble is that when dealing with consciousness, we are dealing with the unborn. We are dealing with a fundamental phenomenon. Consciousness cannot be reduced to anything that, according to materialism, is more than itself. You can find neurons in reality, but you can't find consciousness because it is a first-person ontology. Also, by Dennett's logic, in order to have an explanation for physical reality, whatever we mean by physical, one must start from the opposite, which would be immaterialism. In other words, idealism would have to be true by default. The substrate of reality, then, is not nothing, as this one cannot exist by definition. We do know of something which is not nothing, but also cannot be defined in terms of objects or materials. That something is consciousness. The truth is that you can never experience nothing. You are always experiencing something. All you have is your stream of consciousness and its contents, which make up the mind. Consciousness is what you are. Unconsciousness is a word of convenience for what we are not. It's a word of convenience for, in fact, what we are not focusing on or not displaying in our field of awareness, such as places beyond our human purview or perspective, or even time frames. Your experience is continuous, even when composed of disjointed scenes, as in dreams, or when you pass out 1 minute and wake up the next. to find that you apparently lost an hour. From your perspective, it is continuous. There are no gaps. Even when you experience sleeping soundly and you feel that restful sensation, that is not nothing. It is an experience in consciousness. A lot of people also say that they don't dream. This is wrong. We all dream, but many of us don't remember. And just because you don't remember something at a particular time in the past doesn't mean that you didn't experience it or that you were unconscious. You can never be in unconsciousness, not really, because that's not what you are. Even when people point out to you that you missed time and spatial events when they observed your ostensibly unconscious body. Consciousness transcends space and time. It is where anything can be said to exist. You may semantically distinguish it from the mind when referring to this one as the contents of consciousness. But consciousness is that field of awareness that does the minding. Without consciousness, no dreams of any sort, even the collective dream of reality, can be said to exist. There is no experience of nothingness other than an abstract concept in human minds. You'd be surprised at how oxymoronic people can be. An individual once said to me, "Is nothing the experience of the absence of experience? It beggars belief." The oxymoron couldn't be more glaring. Nothing is nothing. It's the abstraction of nothing, of no thing, or not addressing any particular thing. Nothing doesn't exist other than an abstraction. It's not an experience because an experience is something, a felt sensation, an appearance in the field of awareness. How can one possibly experience the absence of experience itself? It's a non sequitur. It does not follow, because then there would be no experience in the first place to even confirm the alleged existence of nothing as an object or a mentation, in which case it wouldn't be nothing, it would be a mentation that somehow would define the concept of nothing being the absence of experience. In other words, absolute nothing is an impossibility that human minds conceptualize semantically. The question that individual posed creates an unnecessary paradox similar to the liar's paradox. The main point to take from this is that nothing gets behind consciousness. If you manage to strip yourself of every content that makes up your mind, the minding doesn't cease and consciousness becomes aware of itself. I guarantee it from experience. It feels itself. The mirror analogy promulgated in Buddhist circles can help in understanding what's going on here. But it can only go so far, and like all analogies, certainly doesn't possess the actual quality of experience in question. One thing that the mirror analogy captures is that consciousness isn't an object for itself. In fact, it's not any kind of object. But it can feel its formless fundamental self, a real self, not an identity fiction, because experience isn't just what it does, it's also what it is. It is where all concepts happen, and it can identify with any form if it so wishes. It is the only logical ground of being, away from non-existence and underpins all reality, because the ex nihilo alternative is untenable for the reason that nothing has no existence by definition. I could also go on about our reality having a will and being teleological, as manifestly expressed within a chronological time format. I loved reading All Things Are Full of Gods by David Bentley Hart before I had the opportunity of talking to him on the Transcendental Psych channel. Or is it Transcendent Psych channel? I apologise if I got it wrong. I loved the part of the book about teleology where incomplete sentient systems maintain homeostasis against entropy and have intentional goals, as though the fulfilling aims and ideals in mind are a kind of cause. The idea of completeness draws minds who feel incomplete towards it, resisting the natural equilibrium of this entropic world. Here's a powerful quote by David Bentley Hart that is just profound beyond words. The ideal thought and feeling is aimed at truth. The ideal action is aimed at goodness. It's so true. We are divinely inspired in everything that we try to achieve and all our insights. Mathematical axioms are taken to be true without proof because through intuition they are taken to be self-evident. That intuition is still a mystery to human minds. Here's an interesting excerpt from Irreducible by Federico Fagin. We create the mathematical axioms, but the physical world is not our work. So the world could be very different from what we think is self-evident. Quantum theory has amply shown to us that the reality of classical physics, considered almost universally self-evident a century ago, turned out to be a great self-deception. In fact, the deception is so convincing that many scientists still refuse to fully accept the disturbing philosophical and interpretive implications of phenomena such as quantum superposition, entanglement, and indeterminism. That was Federico Fagin. I'll leave you here with two more quotes which pertain to what's been discussed here. The first is by Werner Heisenberg, and the last one will be by F.W.J. Schelling. Quote, "The idea of an objective real world whose smaller parts exist objectively in the same sense as stones or trees exist, regardless of whether we observe them or not, is impossible." Unquote. And finally Schelling, quote, "Nature is visible spirit, spirit invisible nature." Unquote. Ladies and gentlemen, don't forget to like and subscribe, and until next time, I hope you enjoyed it.